Hello and good afternoon. Happy Tuesday, and I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Creating a Green Card Policy, Trends and Considerations. We have a great presentation ahead of us, but before we get there, I do want to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's presentation will last for about 45 minutes, and that includes an audience Q&A, which will be at the end of the main presentation. So we highly encourage you to ask some questions throughout the presentation if you have them. If you do, please type them into the GoToWebinar chat box that you should see on your screen, and we'll try to get to them at the very end. As a reminder, we can only answer general questions. We cannot get into any case-specific items or questions. So in those instances, please consult with your immigration attorney for more information. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to download the recording after today's live session. You will also receive a link to download the slide deck, as well as the SHRM and HRCI continuing education credits. All of these materials will arrive in your email inboxes tomorrow afternoon, so please keep an eye out for that. And if for whatever reason you don't receive that email, just please let us know and we'll be sure to resend it. And additionally, one final note, Susanna and I are all remote, as I'm sure many of our attendees are, so please excuse any audio or video hiccups that may occur. We are not anticipating anything, but you never know with these webinar platforms. Again, we are not anticipating any hiccups, but if something does happen, you can try re-signing, or again, we will have a recording available. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about Envoy. For nearly 20 years, Envoy has been on a mission to fix the inefficient, frustrating, and confusing immigration process. Envoy combines expert legal representation with innovative technology to deliver the only platform that makes it seamless for companies to hire, mobilize, and manage a global workforce. Envoy secures work authorization in over 150 countries, has grown 37% year over year, and works with over 1,000 customers. We are particularly proud of our NPS score, which is a testament to the employee experience that we provide. And I introduced her a few seconds ago, but now I'd like to formally welcome Susanna E. Nichols, a managing attorney from Global Immigration Associates. Susanna, her practice focuses on the H-1B, L-1, TN, E, and O-1 non-immigrant visas, as well as PERM and EB-1 employment-based green cards. She has extensive experience responding to requests for evidence from USCIS and appeals to the Administrative Appeals Office, with a focus on corporate mergers and compliance. And Susanna works with clients in several industries, including financial, technological, nonprofit, and transportation. Susanna, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Oh, thank you so much, Eric. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So Susanna, before we get into discussing green card trends and considerations for employers, as I mentioned, here is our, I just mentioned two of them, but here is a formal look at our today's agenda. And then I have one final housekeeping slide, a quick legal disclaimer, which I will leave up for a few more seconds. And now let's get into the green card trends we're seeing in 2020. So a lot of these stats and charts that you will be seeing throughout the presentation today are from our 2020 Immigration Trends Report, which is available to download. And it's a great look at what some trends we're seeing. I guess just a quick caveat, a quick note. The survey was conducted at the end of 2019, and as I mentioned, we published it in January of 2020. So it is obviously there are a lot of things going on in the world right now. So that the survey was conducted before the COVID-19 pandemic and whatnot. But when it comes to green cards, what we found was more employers are sponsoring foreign nationals for green cards in any year since 2016, and they're starting the process earlier, which we'll get to in a couple slides. And additionally, this is a trend that we're continuing to see, and it's the demand for foreign talent remains high as the skills gap persists and labor markets remain exceedingly competitive. We're seeing more companies using immigration to address these challenges and foster a diverse workplace. And as we take a look at this chart here, we're seeing the question is, well, 85% of employers expect their foreign national headcount to increase or stay the same in this next year. And that 85% is an increase from 80% in 2019. Just something I'd like to point out here, 18% said they expect their foreign national headcount to significantly increase, with 35% saying they expect it to somewhat increase. And the next figure I'd like to highlight is that 93% of employers said that sourcing foreign national employees is important to their company's talent acquisition strategy. Again, this number is in line with trends we've been seeing over the last 3 years. If we combine it, that's where that 93% comes from. 27% are saying sourcing foreign national employees is extremely important, with 34% saying very important, and 32% saying somewhat important. That 27% of what's saying extremely important is actually an increase from 2019. Another highlight is we're seeing more employers sponsoring foreign nationals for green cards. And one interesting trend is they're starting the process earlier in an employee's tenure. Here, showing you these stats, 71% of employers said their company has sponsored a foreign national for permanent residence. And that's an increase from 2019 when it was 66%. And so, Suzanne, I'd like to loop you in here. Is this somewhat in line with what you've been personally seeing, working on green cards over the last year or so?
Yeah, I definitely think, over the past year, but I would say definitely over the span. I've been doing this for a little while, over the past 5+ years, continuing to see an increase in the number and the quickness in which companies are filing for permanent residence for their employees. So this is definitely on trend with what we've been seeing across the board.
Mm-hmm. And Susanna, as we move along to the next slide, we're talking a lot about green cards, and I'm curious to hear, why are green cards a valuable tool for employers and employees? And I guess what are some benefits of a green card?
Well, they're great for both purposes. One, I see more and more companies using them for recruitment purposes because it's something that employees are really looking for. It provides employees with the security of knowing that they have a future to be able to stay in the U.S. Through these green cards. They essentially don't make them have to go through the renewal phase of, let's say, an H-1B or an L, e-visas, whatever they're on that's non-immigrant, which means that they're here temporarily. I think a lot of employees, they do come if they have family members, if they want to start looking at homes. They want to know that they're going to be in the U.S. for the long term. Also, I think as the administration has increased their scrutiny, we're seeing a lot more, RFE trends, seeing a lot more pushback on these employees as they're trying to renew these non-immigrant visas, which is costly both for the employer and obviously stressful for the employee. So the sooner they can get on the path for a green card, the less they have to continue to go through that and the less stress that it causes them and their family members. So I think that it's a benefit from both parts, but I've noticed something that employees are really looking for as part of the benefits.
Susanna, I think you may have cut out there.
Oh, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, we can hear
Yeah,
you now.
I was just saying it's something that can be part of a benefits package, so that the employees can benefit, and then as well as the employers. So it's something that everyone's looking for, and they can certainly benefit equally. Um,
Gotcha.
but when you're looking, and particularly, I think if you have students, it really does help if they do have someone, because then they can start looking at university. Because at some point, those children will age out from being able to be those non-immigrant dependents. So it really serves multiple purposes as far as family planning and future planning for these employees.
Gotcha. And Susanna, quick question. And I guess and just for our attendees, we do have additional webinars and resources on green cards. But Susanna, uh, we're focusing a lot on employment-based green cards, and there are three different types of employment-based green cards. Can you quickly go over those?
Sure. So employment-based green cards, you can go into essentially the first category would be if you don't need any sort of perm sponsorship, which means that you qualify and you don't have to have the labor market tested to prove that there are no other suitable U.S. candidates. The second category is going to be more for your professionals, those positions that may not qualify under that higher first level category, which could be for multinational managers, those that have outstanding positions. The second category for professionals, if you have an advanced degree or if you have a bachelor's degree plus 5 years of experience, and that's also required in the role. And then there's a third category, essentially for those that either don't have a bachelor's degree or the position doesn't require a bachelor's degree. And the reason that those categories, those segments are important is because depending on which one you're in, will determine the queue, the weight that you're actually going for after your employer petition has been filed and before that actual green card application can be submitted with immigration. So people really do push to be in the most favorable category. Obviously, it can be a bit tricky because it's not just determined on whether or not, let's say, someone has a master's degree, but you really do need a position that also requires a master's degree in order to push them into that category. There's quite a few factors, but they are important because it helps them to get to that sort of final step quicker.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And thank you for going over briefly those three different types. And for our attendees, as I mentioned, we have a ton of helpful resources. One of which is a new guide that we recently released called the ABCs of Green Cards. We'll also include it as a link for you to download in a follow-up email tomorrow afternoon, so you can learn more about green cards and some important terminology and phrases. Great. So Susanna, thanks. And as we move along onto this next slide, I think a lot of this emphasizes some points that you just mentioned a few seconds ago, where you mentioned, foreign nationals are eager for the peace of mind that comes with that long-term sponsorship, and that path to permanent residence is a powerful incentive, and as such, employers are investing more resources in immigration perk packages, and which we'll see here on the next slide. We found in our latest trends report, we found that 35% of employers said they have sponsored more green cards over the past year. So we see here in 2020, that's 35%. 2019, it was 29%. So it's a decent jump. Susanna, anything in particular stand out? Or again, this is just pretty much in line with what you've been saying?
I do think that more and more companies are moving up their green card policies to start this process really early. Some of them are doing it at the point of hire, some of them at 6 months, some of them at 1 year. When I would say historically, meaning 4, 5, 6 years ago, I was more seeing this policy lean toward was being controlled more by the max out date. So let's say that someone's on an H or an L. They more wanted to get that green card process started before they essentially were going to lose the person because they had to return home, which was obviously more company driven. And it's really switched to being more, let's go ahead and get this process started so that we can try to keep them there. And also, I think to minimize having to to renew these non-immigrant visas and give a little bit more stability to their employee population.
Gotcha. And Susanna, it's actually a perfect segue into our next section in the next couple of slides. In particular, this one, which I find very, very interesting and emphasizes what you just said. 81% of employers who sponsor green cards start the process within or upon the first year of an employee's service. And that is a big jump from 2019 when it was 66%. And so then if we look at that 81% and break that further down, we see that 26% started immediately, 20% started after 3 months, 18% started after 6 months, and then 17% start that green card application process after 1 year of service. So, Susanna, I have a couple of questions for you relating to this. Could starting early be attributed to the green card application process? And there are quite a few steps involved in that.
I don't know that this is necessarily attributed to that. I will say that I think that if it is, we're going to continue to see this because we did have a major change, and I would say the burden of green card applications this year with the public charge rule, which has added a new form and a tremendous amount of documentation and work to the process. So if that is the driver, I think we'll continue to see that moving into next year and years after, if that rule stays in place. I think that generally this trend is more reflective of what we're seeing in the administration and wanting to get people to have a backup and a more secure policy in place, and then also in order to try to secure talent, because I do think that the job market, as of the time of this survey and up until very recently, was quite competitive. And I think for that reason, people maybe were making their policies a little bit more reflective of trying to recruit talent away from other companies and using their green card policies, saying they'll start it sooner, upon hire within that first year, maybe with something that was put into place more for recruitment purposes, as well as being reflective of just the additional scrutiny we're seeing through USCIS.
I see. Interesting. And so, Susanna, as we move on to the next slide in this section for employer considerations, I'm curious, what steps do employers need to be aware of?
There are so many steps in the green card process, unfortunately. So it's a long road. The first step is really the prevailing wage, and so that's kind of when you talk about whether or not this position that you're looking at is going to fall in with a wage that you believe that you'll be able to pay once that green card gets approved. And then once we go through there, we really go through the perm, which is making sure that no other qualified candidates who are U.S. citizens or permanent residents are willing and able to take the position, meaning that you could actually have someone who's qualified, but if they decided not to take the position, it wouldn't kill the perm process. After the perm process, you really have that I-140, which is really, I think, when you're kind of like coming downhill and through the entire process. And that's the employer's version of your petition. So that's what you file on behalf of your employee, really just saying, this is the position, this is why this individual is qualified, this is what we're prepared to offer them, and this is how we can show that we will be able to pay them. Once that is approved, and if this person happens to be in a queue that is shorter, that allows them to maybe go ahead and apply for that green card, then they can also apply for the green card at that time, or whenever the priority date comes up. And that's the 485. This one really looks at that individual employee. This is going to look at their history in immigration. It's going to look at their criminal history. It's going to look at their medical history and make sure that they are themselves eligible for a green card. It's a more, I would say, highly scrutinized individual assessment than other non-immigrant visas. They really do look at your records, not as closely as citizenship, but it's up there. And then once you actually have that in, then we have the biometrics and the interview. The interview is rather new still. This wasn't always in place for employment green cards. It is now. It may not be in the future. I know that's being waived in many cases due to current situations. It may or may not come back after this is done, but it's kind of something that's new. And then even after that, we do have to wait so they can actually have the card in the mail. The entire process is quite long, usually spanning years, with multiple steps in between, but we just try to take it one step at a time.
For sure, for sure. And speaking of the timeline, Susanna, I think it can vary a lot as well, depending on where the foreign national is from. Is that correct?
Right. So there are two considerations. Really, one is kind of which category are they in? Are they in that ED1 category, that the one where you don't need the perm? Are they a professional? Are they a skilled worker? So that's one consideration. And then if you have to cross-reference that with where they were born, so their actual nationality. And this is based on basically the foreign national population in the United States and how many people are applying for it. So if you're from a country that more people are applying, you're going to have a longer wait. Just the line is longer. So it really does benefit. Some countries it's much quicker than others. Indian nationals notoriously have a longer line. Singapore has a very long line. China has a very long line. If you are in other ones, then you may very well get your green card, even though you filed way after, another individual in the same employment category. You may get your green card much faster, solely based on where you were born.
I see. Interesting. And I just a other quick note, Susanna, you did go over quite a few steps from the high level, and for our attendees, if you are interested to learn more, including like the perm process, we did a webinar a couple of weeks ago with Susanna's colleague, Louis Massard, where he introduced us to the perm recruitment process, and in the beginning of June, we will expand upon that in a Perm 102 webinar. So feel free to view that prior recording, and we hope to see you on the Perm 102 one. Susanna, we got a couple of questions, and one of which is going to lead us into this next slide regarding costs, which are another important consideration. So Susanna, can you provide an overview of some costs associated with green cards?
Sure. So the perm costs themselves, a lot of the costs there will be through the recruitment. So we're talking about having to place it. Newspaper ads can be quite costly depending on where you are. Obviously, the attorney's fees. That's what goes into most of perm. You don't have any filing fees with perm, so that's the good news. But recruitment can be expensive. And unfortunately, it's not always successful on the first time, even though we do our best. If you find another qualified applicant, you may have to do it twice. So it certainly can vary. Those are the main costs in that stage of it. In that second and third stage, you have the I-140 and the I-145. Those do have associated filing fees. There's fingerprinting fees, the medical exam fees. As the employer, you do need to cover some of those costs. I know that some employers do have agreements to maybe recoup some, but for the most part, with the I-140 costs, the employer should be responsible, other than any sort of premium processing costs, if it's beneficial to the employee. For the I-145, as well as any sort of dependents, say if the employee is married, they have 2 children, they're all going to file 485, the employee can be responsible for those costs, as well as the medical exam, any sort of translations, and the fingerprinting, I believe, can all be passed along to the employee if you want. But those are the main fees that we see associated.
Gotcha. And Susanna, one thing that is interesting, and you just mentioned it, was like a contractual stipulation, which is something, a data point I want to highlight on this slide. Um, we see here that 84% of employers said that they cover all green card related fees. And within that number, 49% implement contractual payback stipulations if an employee departs the company within a certain time period. Um, so, Susan, I guess, what does that mean exactly?
It can mean a few things. In general, I try to advise maybe to discourage against these because they can get very technical. Um, for instance, if you do, some sort of clawback, or maybe if the person does depart, you then have to make sure that any money that you're recouping doesn't necessarily, if they are on an H-1B, for example, doesn't bring their H-1B salary below the wage that it should have been. So these things can get quite technical. You also want to make sure you're not violating any sort of state liquidation damage clause if you're going to go that route. So if you do, my disclaimer right now is to work closely with your immigration as well as your employment counsel to make sure that you're complying there. But essentially, some employers do choose to, because this is a costly and it's also a very long process. They don't want people to necessarily get the green card and then leave immediately or within a year. So if that person does, then they can contractually go in to have them recoup some of the costs that they are able to recoup.
Gotcha. Great. And we move on to another employer consideration. Setting expectations. Susanna, why must employers set expectations for their foreign national employees?
I think in this particular area, it's incredibly important because the employees are essentially blind and they're removed from a lot of these processes, and that's because of the way that they're set up by Department of Labor regulations. So it's really important and something that we work to do, and as well as encourage employers to, is to let the employees know as we start the process that this is going to be a long process. It's not going to be quick, and rushing it isn't necessarily always the best option. We do also say, when you can be involved and when you can't. So for instance, during the recruitment phase, most of the perm phase, employees really can't know very much about the details of what's going on other than that it is going on. So I think it's really important to set those expectations up front, and also so that the employees can kind of plan, one, for their just mental patience to be prepared for it, but also, as far as they usually want to know, like, are they able to travel? Is this going to implicate their teenage child who may be aging out quickly? So it's really nice to give a high-level overview so that they can understand how to set their expectations so that they're not, I would say, consistently coming back to you, whoever's managing the program, saying what's going on with my case, and then also so that they can internally manage it with any of their family members.
Gotcha. And one final consideration for employers, that's to utilize technology. Suzanne, I know you're in the Envoy platform every day, and technology can really help throughout the green card process and with perm recruitment, storing those critical documents, providing timelines. So it's also another important consideration. And Susanna, before we get to the end, I'm just curious if there's anything else that you'd like to add regarding the technological component.
I do think that it's very helpful, actually, just from everyone's point of view, to have the visibility that you can have if you're going over, maybe applicants, which I think you can see on the slide. You can see their resumes, you can quickly determine whether or not, they responded to the screening questions. And it's much easier to go through as opposed to having to hand review each resume and make notes. Also, it allows your employees to be able to go in and actually see steps of the process. While they may not see details, they can get a very high-level overview so that they feel like they have access and visibility, even though maybe they can't see, the incremental steps where it comes down to recruitment. So I think it really does help to soothe at least the employee's perspective, but then also it helps to expedite things and keep things organized, which is so important for perm and green card processes. So technology can be very, very helpful here, and I find that it is.
Mm-hmm. For sure, for sure. Great. And with that, we're going to open the floor up to questions. We've been getting a lot of good questions coming in, so excited to address some of these. Just quickly though, before we do have a couple minutes, I do want to make sure that I share this other information. We have a couple more webinars coming up in the month of May. Tomorrow, our Envoy CEO and COO will be taking a look at how employers are responding to the new normal and what is remote immigration, and sharing some recent survey results from a survey we've been running. And then early next week, we'll be taking a look at the COVID-19's impact on Canadian immigration, and we'll be joined by a member of the global team from Envoy Global. So with that, we're going to turn to some questions, and so let's get into it. Just a quick note: apologies for any awkward silences that may occur. Susanna and I have to make sure the questions are okay to ask over the air. So one question here, where does Envoy gather their data to support these charts? Great question. We conducted that survey in conjunction with Harris Poll at the end of 2019, and Harris Poll we surveyed over 400 HR professionals around the country. So that's where that data comes from. Susanna, can you can you kind of discuss the impact from a high level that COVID-19 has had on the green card process?
Sure. So I do think that it's had definitely had some impacts. Unfortunately, I would say probably the one that I'm seeing that's most prevalent would be if you are at a company which is having layoffs, then that does impact the pending terms that are going to be filed. So I will advise in advance that if you do have any sort of pending layoffs, that you maybe consult with your immigration counsel to the best of your ability, so that they can maybe file any sort of pending terms before you actually have the layoff. A lot of times we may be coming up on filing, say maybe we have like another 6 weeks, we're running recruitment. Once there's an actual layoff, if there are U.S. citizen impacted employees and similar positions at that location of the firm, then we either have to open the offer up to that individual who was laid off, which for pretty obvious reasons employers may not want to do, or we cannot move forward filing the perm and we have to restart the process. So I'd say that's probably one of the more immediate impacts. Also, I think that people are maybe wanting to move forward to this process for other employees in order to really give them kind of saying that before some security, so that they don't have to maybe go through traveling to get these visas and all of those things. So it's long term. I think that it will continue to encourage green cards, but I would say in the short term, we really are having to look at any sort of companies that have been impacted by layoffs and how that's going to affect their perm.
I see. Thank you. Susanna, another question for you. Do you have any idea how long the interview backlog is?
It really depends on the location. So if you have someone who maybe lives in I would say maybe more remote location, they probably could get in quicker. If it's an office that's really, really busy, they may have a bigger backlog. Currently, USCIS is shut down to any sort of in-person interviews. So they are actually adjudicating some of these green cards without an interview. So I'm hoping that the overall impact will not result in a further backlog of interviews, but it really is location specific during normal times.
Gotcha. So Susanna, there are a couple of questions regarding the paying back the fees. I'm curious, are you able to provide any, I guess, general considerations that maybe should go into creating a policy like that?
You know, I think it's somewhat difficult to do general ones, but typically we would say if it's something that the employee can be responsible for paying upfront, so that would be, costs associated with their green card application, costs associated with maybe any sort of any travel for whatever reason. Let's say that they wanted to do their green card outside the United States, they needed to fly out there, their medical expenses, the fingerprinting, any of those that they can pay upfront, you can ask to recoup should you pay it upfront instead of them, so long as it does not then negatively impact what I was saying about their H-1B salary, if you were to pull all of those back. If there's any sort of cost associated, maybe premium processing with I-140s, a lot of employees want those for no real reason. They just really want the decision faster. It's not because they're close to, their H-1B max out date and you really need it to keep them in the country. If it's one of those optional cases, you can certainly either have the employee pay those up front, or you could recoup those later if you have an agreement in place. If you do want to have one of these clawback agreements, I think it's important that you don't have it as part of the actual job offer. So I wouldn't recommend it being, a line item in the job offer itself, but have it be a separate agreement that they're reviewing and can sign off on. So if you do want to do that, make sure it's well documented and make sure that it doesn't, I would say, go in, that it's in line with any sort of state liquidated damages that would be applicable to that area.
Okay. And a couple of previous questions were regarding sorry, I lost it for a second. Where do we go to find out how much of a backlog exists at our local office? You can try to go. You can try to go online, and they sometimes have the field offices broken down there. I will be honest, they don't find that to be the most accurate information. They just, I don't think, update it. Usually there's not going to be a huge lag. I would say, weeks or a few months. Most offices do not have a overly burdensome line, but again, it really does depend. If you see a large delay, I would probably check in with USCIS to see what's going on. But arguably, you should be able to check processing times through online. Gotcha. Okay. Sorry, just taking a quick look. Yeah, there's a lot of great questions in here. But again, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, unfortunately, we cannot answer them because they're just too specific. And please consult with your immigration attorney for more information. We'll give it a couple more seconds to see if you have any additional general questions relating to green cards. We'll see if a few more of those roll in. Yes. Okay. Suzanne, I think we're going to end things there. Again, to our attendees, I know there are a ton of questions we did not get to. Again, we just cannot answer them live over the air. So please consult with your attorneys for further information. So with that, Susanna, I want to thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and having this great discussion. And to our attendees, thank you for joining us as well. You will receive a link to download the recording and the slide deck, as well as the Sherman HRCI continuing education credits in a follow-up email tomorrow afternoon. And for further information on green cards, please check out our resources center for past webinar recordings, as well as some newly made available guides regarding the ABCs of green cards. So with that, have a great rest of your afternoon.
All right, thank you.